Let's move into the Heisman Trophy talk. It seems like almost every player outside of Jeremiah Smith from the preseason is out of the race, or at least that you would have thought. And this is just about as wide open as I can remember. And maybe this is the year that it's not a QB award. I don't know. We'll see. But who are you looking at in this Heisman race that you like the most? And who do you see potentially getting a New York invite?
Yeah, so I'm sticking by my guns here, right? I said Jeremiah Smith before the season started, right? Carnell Tate had that amazing game versus Texas, and he essentially won them that game. But Jeremiah Smith is still a dog. He's still one of those guys you look at and is the X factor on that team. I don't like Julian Sain has been decent against bad competition, and Carnell Tate did have that game, but Jeremiah Smith is undoubtedly the best player on that offense, and he's the best player on an offense that leads the number one team in the country at this very moment. So I think that if he plays consistently and he's just getting 100 yards every single game, 150 yards, 2 touchdowns, has his Heisman moments where he's playing against Penn State, Michigan, and making one-handed catches and really is the X factor in those games, I don't see why it wouldn't or it couldn't be him, or at least he wouldn't get an invite because of the fact that, like you said, this race is so wide open this year. John Matier was the Heisman favorite going into last week, and then he breaks his or has surgery on his hand. Shout out Dr. Shin. And then from then, now we have a bunch of guys in the mix. Connor Stockton is in there. There's Carson Beck's in that race. And then that's not even mentioning the 2 favorites. So at this point, so there's definitely a lot to be said about this Heisman race. And I think it's completely up for grabs. I think Carson Beck will definitely be in that mix, if not in New York, one of the guys who's just barely left off that list. I think Jeremiah Smith has a very good case to be right there too.
Yeah, I when I look at the top, I mentioned there's one player from the preseason that's still involved in all of this, and that is Jeremiah Smith. So I think you covered everything with him. I think part of his case does get helped a little bit by the quarterbacks kind of shuffling a little bit as he builds his resume. I think that that's a big part of a position player or non-QB position winning the Heisman or getting a New York invite is the quarterbacks not really being at the very, very top tier because it is a QB award at the end of the day. But Carson Beck is an interesting position because for me, at least, I think that he's a guy who can get a New York invite, but I don't know if I see upper echelon he'll win the Heisman just yet. But I think the way that Miami has played so far this year, they're getting the number 1 overall team buzz. I think that if he just takes care of the ball, will probably end up getting a New York invite. Dante Moore out of Oregon, Marcel Reed, Texas A&M, Gunnar Stockton, Georgia, Fernando Mendoza out of Indiana. They all look good. And Dante Moore's got a great opportunity this week against Penn State to really vault up these the odds to win the Heisman. But I don't know if any of those guys are definite yeses for me right now to win the Heisman. And then Matier, obviously he had that thumb surgery. You got to the Dr. Shen shout out before I did. I definitely think he would have been the guy as of right now. I believe he was top in the odds before that injury. But right now, yeah, it's wide open. Maybe it ends up going to a defensive player. Maybe Ruben Bain is a guy that we hear later on in the season from Miami off the D line as somebody who gets a New York invite. I think that that's very possible that we could see a player that is really dominant defensively on one of the top defenses in the country get some buzz as the season goes on. But we're going to need more quarterbacks to fall off a little bit. And including maybe even Carson Beck too at that point. I did a little bit of research before I toss it back to you on when was the last year that a quarterback wasn't invited to New York? Because obviously it seems like it's a QB award to win it, but has it ever been as so wide open to the point where you have a receiver or 2 running backs or 2 running backs and a defensive guy or what have you? And the New York kind of fluctuates from 3 to 5 invites. Since they have invited multiple people, based off the research I've done, and I believe they started inviting multiple people early 80s, I don't think it has ever happened where a quarterback wasn't among one of the players that were invited to New York. So there's going to be probably at least one. And for some of the years, there was just at least one. So I think that that's something to keep an eye on if it gets that bad or if any of these guys don't have great games. Because Garrett Nussmeier, who we haven't even mentioned either, was somebody who's getting a lot of Heisman buzz, especially even after week 1, didn't really play great. But he was a guy, he was a name, and just seems like he's not even mentioned.
Yeah, I think that the Garrett Nussmeier buzz has definitely died down, but I think that stat like makes a lot of sense just because of the fact that it is not only a quarterback award, but if you're going to invite 3 to 5 people and that award be for a specific position, you'd think that position would always get an invite. At least, at the very least, the best quarterback on the best team is going to make the Heisman New York City kind of like watch along, for that lack of better words, Heisman finalists. But Fernando Mendoza being the Heisman favorite at this point is like a little bit funny to me. No offense to Indiana fans. I just think that this is maybe an overreaction by the markets to one really, really good game. And do I think that Fernando Mendoza is a good quarterback? Sure. But him winning the Heisman is just a little bit of a stretch for me. And I'll completely walk it back if he does end up winning the Heisman. He has some big games coming up on his schedule. But I just don't see it. Like, he'd have to win that Penn State game, or that I think they also play Ohio State, for it to really even be a consideration for him to win the Heisman. And I don't see Indiana as true contenders like that. But if they somehow get those games done, make it to a Big Ten championship, sure, Fernando Mendoza could be a part of that conversation. Just he's the Heisman favorite by a large margin at this point. I think the markets are currently at plus 650 for Fernando Mendoza, and then the next closest is Dante Moore at plus 1,000. Who, off of that point, I think that Dante Moore has a way better chance. Oregon was my national champion pick coming into the season, and Dante Moore has like given me a lot of faith in that pick. Getting to sit behind Dylan Gabriel last year, 5-star quarterback, transfer from USC. Like, he's been highly touted his whole career, and he had to sit for a little bit now, but he's made the best of his opportunity. And obviously, it hasn't been against the greatest competition over the first couple weeks, but he does have a chance to prove it at least this week against Penn State, and then further along in that Big Ten schedule. And I think that's one of the guys that at the quarterback position you'd kind of like is definitely a guy that you want to look out for at this point, because there just aren't that many. It feels like all of the quarterbacks that came in with a lot of buzz, Arch Manning, Garrett Nussmeier, like you mentioned, have just have fallen off a little bit. And then Jaden Mayava, also out of USC, is playing really well. So I think they're one of the most explosive offenses in the country. So I think that's another name you can throw out there as one of those guys that could definitely like be sitting in New York by the end of the season.
I think out of all of the names that I'm seeing at the very top of the FanDuel odds, I like Dante Moore the best. I just would love to see it against Penn State for his case specifically. This is definitely a year where if there was a running back like Ashton Genty or a wide receiver corner like Travis Hunter, I would be willing to sit here and tell you that for the first time in 45 plus years or whatever, that this is going to be the year that a quarterback doesn't get an invite to be a finalist. They would invite 3, and they would maybe pair him with a Jeremiah Smith or something like that, if that was the case, right? If those two guys were in the running this year, but that's obviously not the case. And you had so many of the preseason guys drop off, so it leaves room, it leaves some openness in the race, and I think it's fun. I enjoy like keeping track of the Heisman when it's not so obvious, and it's almost like this rather than a 2-man race.
Yeah, I think just the whole general landscape of college football is becoming more fun as a whole. Being able to watch a team like your favorite team, and even though they have a loss or two, be able to consider them serious contenders to at least be in the college football playoff, and the Heisman race being so open. I think that this year of college football will be one of the most fun that like I've ever watched, at least personally. Also, I wanted to correct Dante Moore was a UCLA transfer, which how good does that look like in hindsight? So yeah, I said USC, but Dante Moore definitely a UCLA transfer.